President Trump's move to do away with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the federal government has also made waves in the public and private sector. Companies like Walmart, Target, and McDonald's recently moved to abandon their DEI initiatives. Backers of Trump's decision say these practices were discriminatory and promoted inequity. But advocates argue social equity initiatives are essential to create a fair and balanced society. Here with more on DEI initiatives are Xavier Ramey, CEO of Justice Informed, a social impact consulting firm, and on Zoom, Jacob Hubert, president of the Liberty Justice Center. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Welcome back.
Thank you, Brandis.
Xavier, I want to start with you. What is the historical significance? What's the context behind DEI?
DEI was created as a program shortly after the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Of course, we created a legislative environment where we said that America was equal and that all persons should be treated equally without discrimination with regards to certain protected identities. However, that doesn't mean that the social application of that was just going to happen. So diversity, equity, inclusion programs were created to start to both incentivize but also hold accountable institutions, communities, and individuals that didn't comply with that law. And so that was sort of the dawn of DEI. Where it's gone since then is a bit further. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Absolutely. What are some of the misconceptions of DEI today?
One, I think it's one of the greatest misconceptions is that it's trying to get unqualified people in when the reality is we're trying to get unqualified people out. DEI is not about trying to get unqualified people of color into high-ranking roles and get women into jobs that they haven't worked for and these sorts of things. It's actually to say that America has never had a competitive employment marketplace. When you suppress labor and you don't allow for women to enter into the workplace and you don't have data that shows whether there's a racialized effect in hiring practices for law firms, for instance, eventually you have to ask yourself, why aren't there more black lawyers? Why aren't there more women doctors? Why aren't there more Indian folks working in some of these companies? Like, what's going on here? There's a reason for that. And DEI is an apparatus to level that playing field.
Jacob Hubert, given the history of race and sex and gender discrimination in this country, why wouldn't DEI help move equity forward?
Look, we have the Constitution that requires the government to treat everybody equally, regardless of their race. We have laws that prohibit race discrimination, and we have plenty of lawyers who are willing to go to bat for people who've been discriminated against based on their race, and that's all very good. But what we're talking about with these programs that President Trump has sought to eliminate are programs that promote people or give people positions based on their race or their sex or a characteristic like that, rather than on their qualifications for the job. And so what I think President Trump is saying, or what a lot of people believe right now, is that we should get all kinds of racial discrimination out of our government, whether any kind of racial preference, and just treat people as individuals, hire people who are qualified, and if there is invidious discrimination going on in any direction, get rid of that discrimination.
Do you think that just simply being more mindful of the barriers that history has erected for some folks in this country, do you think that that is a form of discrimination?
I don't think we're really talking about anybody being mindful here. What we're talking about and what the president got rid of are programs that actually make decisions about who will be hired, who will be promoted, and that sort of thing based on race, sex, and characteristics like that. People want to say, oh, you don't want to teach children about slavery? You don't want to teach military cadets about the Tuskegee Airmen? That's not what this is about. That's a total straw man that people bring up to cover the fact that what we're really talking about is getting rid of discrimination, treating everybody as equal individuals and judging them and giving them positions and pay based on their merit. That's all this is actually about. And I think people are tired of the kind of racial division that proponents of these programs so often stoke to try to tell some people they're victims and other people they're oppressors and set them against one another. Racial conflict, unfortunately, people feel it, has increased in recent years because there are so many determined to stoke this conflict and profit from it on every side. And what I think this push against DEI is really about is saying, no, forget race, forget all of that, and let's go back to treating each other as equal individuals.
I want to hear a clip briefly from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. She's discussing the removal of funding to DEI programs.
It is the responsibility of this president and this administration to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. That is something that President Trump campaigned on. That's why he has launched DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, who is working alongside OMB. And that's why OMB sent out this memo last night, because the president signed an executive order directing OMB to do just this. And the reason for this is to ensure that every penny that is going out the door is not conflicting with the executive orders and actions that this president has taken. So what does this pause mean? It means no more funding for illegal DEI programs.
Illegal DEI programs. Jacob, are DEI programs illegal?
Yes, if they are giving people benefits, privileges, jobs, promotions based on race or sex. That the law makes that illegal across the board, and it doesn't say you can discriminate against this race, you can discriminate in favor of that race. The law demands that the government especially treat everybody equally. And so if you have programs that aren't doing that, yes, they are illegal. If it's the government doing it, they violate the Constitution.
Okay, so while we're on it, let's talk a little bit about private companies, because the executive order from the White House focused on funding DEI programs at a federal level, but we're also seeing private companies, Walmart, Target, McDonald's, they're also abandoning their DEI initiatives. Xavier, I want to come to you first. Why do you think that is?
Well, partly because I think they believe things that, like what Mr. Hubert just said. They think the DEI is about creating these check boxes and giving unqualified people jobs. They think the DEI is about training people to hate. And the reality is that most people don't even know how to love. What we're teaching them is how to include persons that they most likely don't live around. The reality is most white Americans do not live around an African American. And most African Americans don't live around persons who are of Indian descent. We are a segregated country. And in order to actually create a space that is equal, when we come into an integrated space, such as the workplace, and the workplace is the most integrated space for the majority of Americans, not their homes, then we have to do the work of understanding how to teach them to do the work of integration, to live up to those values that the Constitution says, which is that we are not only all created equal, but we are to be treated equally. We're not training people or teaching people to hate. We're not using race as a straw man. What we're doing is letting people know that you don't know what race is and how it's affected people. I would challenge Jacob to consider, why is it that there are less than 5% of the partners in major law firms across the United States who are African American? And why are the majority of them white men? Why is it that 91% of all venture capital dollars go to white male businesses, yet we have white men in Texas going to the Supreme Court saying that small business grants to women of color is somehow unconstitutional because they can't apply for that when 91% of the money goes to white men, but they'll shut down all the apparatuses for getting data about the why, things like the EEOC, things like the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau. They'll shut those down like President Trump is doing right now to ensure we can't measure just how unequal it is, and then say that counting inequality is a form of injustice and creating programs to address it is a form of discrimination. So, it's disingenuous.
So the president, he brought up DEI in the face of tragedy just last week. Let's take a listen.
FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so.
Jacob, is there a danger in baselessly faulting DEI for a failure like this?
Yeah, I don't know, where the president gets his notions about this. I don't know too much about that specific situation. But, the question was raised, well, why are, only 5% of law firm partners, if that's the case, people of color, or whatever the statistic is? Well, I would say if you wonder why certain demographic groups are underperforming, let's look at the schools that we force them to attend. Look at the Chicago public schools that have been failing minority children for decades, and look at the people in this country who don't want those families to have a choice. Wouldn't you know it, it's the same public sector unions and other interest groups that push DEI. I think these people, if they're really concerned about this sort of thing, should take a look at why people lack opportunities. It's because they lack educational choice. It's because they have a government that puts up barriers to entrepreneurship that make it difficult for people to succeed. It's about people who profit off of keeping people dependent and in bad schools. If you're not talking about that, then I question very much whether someone is really about the success of everyone or if someone is about profiting from racial division.
Okay. I wish we could talk about this a whole lot more because I know that both of you have a lot of thoughts and a lot more to add. I'm sure it is a conversation that we'll have to keep having. Until then, that is where we're going to have to leave it. Xavier Ramey and Jacob Hubert, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandis.